Ask people a question, they're going to answer the way they kind of think you want them to answer to a degree.
Yep.
Earlier this year, there was a survey done by the National Association of Convenience Stores that we participated in. And we asked customers, to your knowledge, what percentage of people in America drive an electric vehicle, battery electric vehicle? And they said 20%. So the knowledge of what's going on in the electrified space is inflated because the coverage is so extensive. There's so much news being made about electrified vehicles, investment in battery technology, announcements by OEMs to go all electric, policies to ban combustion engine sales in the future. There's so much noise going on that it has really inflated people's perception of where the market is. Now, 36%, yeah, the 5% have one. 41% of the market thinks for the next 3 years they'll have some sort of electrified powertrain. Not really surprising, because quite frankly, you're going to have a ton more electric hybrid vehicles available. Already last year, we eclipsed 6% of sales were hybrid. First time we've gotten above 3.5% ever. So you saw an influx of these vehicles come to market. A lot of OEMs are saying we're only going to offer certain models in hybrid powertrain option regardless. So you're going to see a huge increase there. So that being said, always have to question what people's motivation is, what they're hearing, and what their knowledge base really is. I don't think everybody understands what an electric vehicle is. So all that being said, who is the Fuels Institute and why am I rambling on about this? We were put together about 10 years ago to bring together stakeholders in the transportation energy space to look at how do we make the market work better? How do we reduce emissions in a way that provides customers access to affordable, reliable transportation? And so we've got a board of 60 to 65 stakeholders ranging from electric vehicle charging infrastructure proponents all the way to oil companies, to biofuels people, to national lab engineers. They decide what we research. They peer review everything we publish. And their primary job in the peer review is to make sure that we're not publishing anything that's biased. We do not advocate. We do not pursue any solution. We don't even weigh into what the national or global objective should be. That's for other people to decide. And they decide the decarbonization. So we're doing our research right now to figure, okay, if the goal is to decarbonize, how do we do that in a way that is consumer friendly, market friendly, and sustainable? When you asked me to define sustainable, I think the term sustainability has been co-opted. And as this survey you showed indicates, most people think it means environmental. The definition of sustainable is long lived, can last a long time. And we started the Fuels Institute, and I said, you know what? I don't care what technology or fuel you're bringing. It could be the best for the environment. It could be the best for consumers. It could be the best everywhere. If customers can't access it or don't want to buy it, it's going to fail. Same with environmental policies, environmental objectives and strategies. If it does not benefit the consumer, it will fail because the consumer will not accept it, will not support it, and it eventually will fade away. And so what we're really looking at here is we have to reduce emissions, whether it's carbon or criteria pollutants. Reducing emissions is a good thing, and it should be a priority for everybody. But we need to do it in a way, and TJ mentioned access. And we have got to make sure that we do not compromise individual people's access to affordable, reliable transportation, whether it be transit, energy for their vehicles, whatever, what have you. If you think about disadvantaged communities, rural or lower income communities, the only way they can improve their livelihood and expand their opportunities is to be able to move around. And so we have to make sure that the needs of people are being considered at the same level or even a higher level than the needs in the environment. You hear some people say, we need to reduce carbon at all costs. Well, that is the most, I believe, insensitive and uninformed approach, because you can't. If it's too costly, it's going to fail. And if it's too costly, you're going to put people who are in economic situations in a really difficult condition. And so what we're trying to do is figure out, how do we do this? You can electrify a lot, and we should. An electric vehicle is going to have a huge role in the market going forward. They make a lot of sense in a lot of circumstances, a lot of markets. Not all circumstances, not all markets, at least not now. So what are we going to do in the meantime? And how are we going to reduce carbon emissions from the medium and heavy duty commercial fleet? It has very different needs and duty cycles. How are we going to help people enhance their economic opportunity to the transport in a cost-effective way while reducing their emissions? And I get into this debate all the time. This will be the last comment I make before I turn it back to you, is if you are really concerned about the environment, and you think electric vehicles are going to save the world and we're facing a crisis, we've already lost, because it's going to take decades to turn over the fleet. We need to be bringing technology solutions like electric vehicles, like fuel cell vehicles, like low carbon, zero carbon liquid fuel options. But in the United States, there's almost 300 million vehicles with combustion engines running on liquid fuels. In the world, there's 1.4 billion vehicles running on liquid fuels combustion engines. What are we gonna do about those legacy vehicles? They're not going away tomorrow. And we're not gonna be able to convert every vehicle in the world to these new technologies in the next 20, 30 years. So we need to be thinking about all options available to reduce carbon emissions wherever we can, upstream of carbon capture, all the way through to low carbon liquid fuels, to advanced technologies from combustion engines, to new technologies to enhance transit. I really like what TJ talked about. We need to be thinking about how we design our communities to make them more livable, make them more mobile, to give us options. We are a car-centric society. For me, that's great. I love my cars. I love driving. It's one of my most favorite things to do. But we need to figure out options, and we need to really be thinking smartly, not sound bites. Policy by sound bite is going to fail. We need to really be rolling up our sleeves, digging in deep, and looking at the nitty-gritty details of how we combine transit and new vehicles and energy options and all these things together to benefit the environment and communities and people individually. It has to be a life cycle environmental analysis. You have to look at from the time you start mining materials, harvesting materials to produce the fuel, the energy, or the vehicle, wherever the vessel is, all the way through its manufacture, operations, end of life, recycling, what have you. You have to look at the whole thing. There's no such thing as a zero emission vehicle. There's a zero tailpipe emissions vehicle, but there's no zero emissions, nothing zero emissions. And so we need to be honest about what we're trying to do here and what our options are. I really think it comes down to, if we put our focus on, one of the things I've been using in my speeches lately is decarbonization does not equal electrification. Electrification is part of a decarbonization strategy. But if we keep our focus on reducing carbon, getting down to a low CO2 equivalent emissions profile on transportation, now we can look at all of our options. And we need to look at use cases specifically, individually, as small sectors. What makes sense for the trash hauler? What makes sense for the long haul reefer truck? What makes sense for the passenger vehicle? What makes sense for a family of 5? What makes sense for, you start thinking that way. What makes sense in West Virginia versus the Pacific Northwest? Very different. What makes sense in Montana versus Boston? If we start thinking that way, we can customize solutions that accelerate our decarbonization path at the lowest cost in the most consumer-friendly mindset. Because if you're going to tell a family of 5 or a family of 6 even, you need to buy an electric vehicle, it's the only way you're going to be a contributing member of the decarbonization plan. They go, I got 2 dance recitals, 2 soccer games, a basketball thing, and I got to do my shopping, and I got to do all my house cleaning. I don't have 30 minutes to charge. You're going to force them into a technology that's not suitable what they want and what they need. And so we have to be very open to options. And I think, unfortunately, we get into, as just feel good, we get into sound bites. And because politicians don't like complexity, and their audiences hate when politicians get complex, but the solution is not simple. The solutions are very complicated, and we need to have serious discussions about what we can do, where we can do it, and when we can do it.
What is it going to take to motivate that type of systemic design thinking rather than the sound bites?
I think there's going to be a wake-up call. Right now, there are major global consulting firms saying half of all vehicles in America sold in 2030 will be electric, because that's what the narrative wants them to conclude. That is not serving this purpose very well, because I don't think it's taking consideration all the variables that go into.
So it gives us a feeling that we're making a difference by doing this, when in reality, systemically, it's not changing very much.
It's making us think, it's sending the message that the answer's already been determined and that the future is certain. The future is not certain. Uncertainty is the only thing we know is certain in the future. And so when you start doing that, saying this is what's going to happen and this will be the future, you are cutting off funding for additional research. you're cutting off discussion. Because if you don't abide by that predetermined outcome, you're a heretic. You're not welcome in the discussion anymore. That's the danger. I think the technology of autonomy in transportation has huge upsides. There's a lot of downsides, a lot of hurdles we have to overcome, which is going to slow this down. The regulations are not set up for this. Insurance policies are not set up for this. And you having a automated vehicle share the road with a human driver scares me. Not because the computer, it's that human driver that scares me. And so figuring out a way to bring these to market in ways that are in controlled environments, as TJ just described. I see autonomous vehicles and over-the-road trucking operating late at night in a platoon, reduce fuel consumption by 40% and address the driver shortage by moving a fleet of vehicles to a point where a driver can take the last mile. Makes tons of sense. But we need to get the regulations out of the way to allow innovation to really make an impact on the market.
John, Anna was asking an interesting one on the innovation side. Do you believe that bio-based composites and fuel will be accelerated in production due to the urgency of the climate impacts? Or is consumer knowledge in priority before, do we have to have more consumer knowledge and awareness and priority before that's going to be something that can be marketed?
The consumer knowledge is probably the last thing you need to worry about. When it comes down to fueling up their vehicle, if they're told it's safe and they believe who's telling them that, they're going to put in whatever's the cheapest.
So the science has got to be solved.
The science is there. It's the regulations. And I think where we are is we could use a lot more bio content in our transportation fuel, and we should. It can reduce the carbon intensity of fuel by up to 50%. And as we implement carbon capture sequestration on the manufacturer side, you can actually reduce that carbon intensity even further. So we can have significant impact on those legacy vehicles on the road and the millions of combustion engines coming on the road. That's probably the easiest way to reduce the carbon intensity of the fuel. The problem is the regulations and the compatibility requirements are such that bringing them to market is extremely challenging. And you saw the last president and the current president both tried to authorize E15, the 15% ethanol blend, to be sold in the summer months. One got thrown out by the court. The other one's using emergency waiver pavilions on a 20-day rotating basis. You need an act of Congress. And the challenge is Congress has bought into the fact there's one solution, and it's electrification. So why are we going to talk about liquid fuels? That's what I'm talking about. The danger of telling people that the answer has been found is cutting off our ability to bring new solutions or revive old solutions. Working together, that seems so alien these days. We had our annual conference in May, and we had a discussion on decarbonization and had a lot of traditional powertrain people speaking. And I was talking to one of our electric vehicle advocates afterwards, who just joined our board, and asked, what do you think? So, it's great for me to hear this because we live in our own echo chamber. We only talk to the people who are in our sector. I have not thought about this other broader perspective of the other 98% of vehicles on the road. And I've never heard these perspectives. It's really helpful to do that. We have to stop talking to people who think just like we do. We have to start working together. We need to bring the transit and the OEMs and the fuel providers and the new transportation innovators together and talk about, okay, what works? How do we put this puzzle together in a way that benefits the greatest number of stakeholders as possible while improving our environmental footprint? Until we get out of that echo chamber, until we start talking to people who may think differently than we do, we're going to get stuck in this battle of he said, she said, and we're not going to make the progress we need to make. So it's key. I think Jesse's absolutely right. It's got to be optimistic. It's got to be aspirational and uplifting. It can't be fear mongering. It has to be, hey, these are technologies that, one, improve the convenience of your life, make you more productive, more satisfied, but also benefit the environment. That's a win-win. And if we start thinking that respect, you get more people bought in. I mean, when people try to scare me into doing something, I do the exact opposite every single time, no matter how legit they are, just because I don't resonate. And I think we need to be much more aspirational, and we need to lead. The moonshot was an aspirational objective.